I'd like to introduce Caron Hummer, right?
Yes.
And you are going to talk about what can you do in time of uncertainty. And I believe this is going to be a presentation and a panel.
Yes. Well, presentation first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's it. Over to you, Caron.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Please.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name's Caron Hummer. I'm with Internet Tool and Die, and I'm their people person. So we're going to talk about, uncertain times in the employment environment and what we can do to protect ourselves from layoffs should they occur. I think we've all seen the news recently. It seems to be just covered in layoffs, and I think that if we're not all thinking about, potentially being laid off, I don't know, I think it's impacting all of us, and it's definitely a time of uncertainty. So stressful. So what we're going to talk about is, if you haven't been laid off, what can we do to prevent yourself from that unfortunate situation? And it's a continuous process. It's kind of like a care and feeding of a plant. It's something that we have to do continually, and there are a number of things that we have to tend to protect ourselves from that. In the event that you're laid off, it does suck. It's terrible. And the range of emotions that are associated with this, it's a shock, and then it's anger, and all of those things. So for most people, when we're laid off from a job, it's worse than getting a divorce. I've been in both, and they're both terrible. So how can we prevent this breakup from ever happening? And so think about the things that, if it happens, what can you do to protect yourself? Do you take a vacation? Do you have self-reflection? Make yourself, take care of yourself first, and then what are the next actions you need to take to start that job search? Vent to your friends, get it out. If we're all here, it's a community where we need to lean on each other. And that's how we're going to find our next job. It's through our connections and the people that we're working with. And we're all in the same industry. So it's likely that we will find our next job with someone in this room or someone in the conference, right? All right. First thing, don't be desperate. Just the worst decisions are made when we're coming from a place of fear. So take a breath and think about, what are the things that are important to you in your next job move. Think about who you can reach out to lend a hand. I know I think human nature says that we all want to help each other. So all we have to do is ask. Sometimes the ask is hard, or maybe embarrassing for some reason. But we all need to reach out and use our community and our connections, wherever those might come from. So look at the people in your network. Maybe there are people that, second or third degree removed. Those are probably the people that we're going to find that next job with. So you're going to use the tools of your community here in person. Like, if you have the opportunity, have a coffee with someone, make that connection, have dinner, go to the beer and gear, do all of those social things. I will tell you, these events, I have to gear myself up for them. It's a state of mind. You truly just have to, all right, I got to get my game face on. I have to stretch myself, be ready to have a conversation, ask questions, and use those connections that we're talking about. So, and like I said, NANOG is the perfect place for it. So, and then we also need to have some self-reflection. So what are the things that, I need to improve upon? Where are my strengths? How can I sell my strengths to my next employer or potential employer? And be really honest with yourself and figure out what are those steps that you can take to hone your skills or take that next step in your career. Maybe it's earning a certification or taking a class or writing a white paper or something. So do that assessment. So now there's also a lot of homework involved. And by homework, you need to think about potentially what are the industries that seem to be recession proof or layoff proof. Think about like the companies you might want to target. Are there companies that haven't laid off yet? Maybe they're the right place to land. Think about where you want to work and what their company ethos is. Does it align with what you want to do? And maybe it's mission focused, whether you're helping someone, you're working for a nonprofit, or you like government contracting because of the military mission. So many things can impact your decision about what direction you take when you're starting your job search. So once you figured out a direction, look at your contacts, look at LinkedIn, find companies or people that that work for the companies that you'd like to work for. Or if you hear of a company that's hiring, and before you take that step to apply, look at your network in LinkedIn, see if you know someone. I always like to connect with people, to give feedback, what I know about the company or the people. You need to do research on the people you'd be working with. You actually get the interview and do your research before you walk in the room or take the call. It's really great for a hiring manager to see that you've done some due diligence and you have similarities in something, or you both went to the same school or things like that. So those commonalities can be very important and strengthen your tie with that person. So anyway, we'll move on to the next slide. All right, so here's the thing. The worst thing about there are a lot of bad things about a job search. Let's be real. No one likes it. It's terrible. It's the worst thing. And working on your resume is such a chore. And I don't know, I personally don't keep mine brushed off. I probably should. There are talent influencers out there that are promoting keeping a weekly track of all the things that you're doing. It's your projects, your return on the investment of this company, having you as an employee. You've saved them money, you've saved them time. These are things that are really important to put on your resume and to have keywords, because as a recruiter, we have to make sure you're meeting those skills. You have the skills referenced in your resume to make the hire, or to even forward you to a hiring manager half the time. So there are a lot of bad resumes out there. I'd like to impart, please don't put your picture on your resume. There are a number of reasons for that, but it's definitely an area where someone might, profile you for whatever reason and not hire you because of the way you present in a picture. So it's just best practice. Don't put your picture on your resume, please. Also have a professional email address. I have a running list of funny email addresses, honestly. They're just like, wow, I can't believe you actually applied to a job with that resume. It needs to be easy to read. As someone looking at, like a recruiter looking at your resume, only gives it a 30-second shot, first go round. 30 seconds is all. We were just making sure you have the keywords. And then if you're meeting the mark on most of those points, we'll take a deeper dive. And then we'll reach out to ask for a conversation to see if where you are on your job search and what you might be looking for in your next opportunity. So make it easy to read. If it's paragraphs and paragraphs, it's just hard on the eyes in general. Keep your fonts consistent. things like that. It's like a professional document, any other professional document. So make sure you're hitting those things. So now, next up at the top of the hour, we have 8 minutes left of this presentation, but Mark Granovetter is, actually he's Dr. Mark Granovetter, nominated 4 times for a Nobel Prize. He's done incredible research since the 70s on the importance of our ties and our network. So we need to talk about how to put this into practice. And I touched on that a few minutes ago, but really, most of our jobs, I don't know, looking out into the crowd, did you get your job through someone you knew? Or you're not going on the job boards and putting your resume out there so every recruiter in the world can search it. You want to work somewhere that is recommended to you. It feels like a safe place to land to some extent, but ask a lot of good questions, and applying cold, it's maybe a second or third resort. Please try to use your network first. That's the best practice. So as far as the quick snapshot of what your journey could be in general, every company has a different mode of putting people through a process. But generally, you submit your resume, you have to fill out the application. Please, Lord, let that application process not be another hand jam of all the information that you've already sent in your resume and have to put it in 3 different systems down the road as you're going through this process. That's, the most annoying thing ever. So recruiters review your resume. We'll send it to a hiring manager for consideration. If we get that thumbs up, we'll coordinate an interview. So once you get to that interview process, it's really important to build a strong relationship with the people involved in that hiring process, whether it's an HR person, a recruiter, or hiring manager. These people are here to advocate for you if they, find an interest in you as a candidate. It's the likelihood of them bringing you on is greatly increased if you're following up with a thank you note. You're giving your recruiter feedback on how the interview went, and make it honest. It doesn't have to be ugly, but if it wasn't a great experience, they really need to know because they can adjust fire. And they should be giving you feedback on your resume or your interview and things like that, because you need to know if you make it to the next step, what you need to do to, potentially get that offer. So follow up, be on time. Timeliness is great. I don't know if anyone has ever been ghosted by someone in the recruiting field. It's terrible. It's like you've put in how many rounds of interviews, and then all of a sudden it goes dead. It's the worst. It's the worst feeling. So follow up with them. And if you don't get the right answer, go to someone else within the organization and ask why you didn't get that, get the feedback or the job or the next interview. So unfortunately, we'll all be ghosted once, if not twice. And, when you're going in for interviews, whether it's virtual or in person, particularly virtual, I've had some great stories about people's crazy backgrounds or clothes or lacking of, it's, we need to make sure we're putting forth a professional visage of ourselves. So, and be honest throughout the process. So if you walk in and, let's say ask for $100,000, and I know that's a lot less than everybody in this room deserves, but if you go through the interview process and all of a sudden you've doubled your salary, they need to know why. It's fair. It's a negotiation on both sides of the fence, but honesty throughout the process will really benefit you and, the employer in the process. So anyway, I know this was short and sweet. Sorry for the technical difficulties at the beginning of the half hour. But if you have any questions about what the process is like, or your job search, or if I can help someone with their resume, find me on LinkedIn. I would be glad to connect with you and help you in any way that I can.
First of all, thank you for this.
Sure.
I'm in the program committee of NANOG. I do think that we need the career track, especially these days of uncertainty. And maybe this is something that should be done potentially more frequently.
Sure.
So the question I have, what you put on there is spot on. Pretty much we all follow the same steps.
Sure.
Do you think there is a different approach if you are at the beginning of your career, the middle of your career, the end of your career,
Sure.
and you find yourself on the marketplace?
I think I do think there are a few nuances that might be a little different. Generally, the message is the same. Earlier in your career, I would suggest finding someone in the industry to be your mentor. So that's someone that can shepherd you through a process, that can give you feedback, honest feedback, whether you want to take the feedback or not, that's your choice. But everyone actually should be just networking. Honestly, that's how we're going to help each other and prepare ourselves should something happen, with layoffs. So, and what was your name? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
I wrote this. I should, I should be honoring it. Anna Balsami from Akamai, and also the
Nice to
secretary
meet
of
you.
the program committee.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate your time.
My name is Peter Thimmesch. I'd like to wish everyone a very joyful Valentine's Day. There are chocolates aplenty around here. If you need any, we've got them in our little sponsor suite. That way you can share them with people that you're with. Okay. So this is actually a fanboy moment for me. I've been a huge fan of this guy for years. I hold a book that was gotten by my father. Getting a job, studying context and careers. So I watched my father, who's a nationally recognized journalist, build connections through interpersonal touch points for more than decades. And 1974, before many people in this room were born, or few of us were, Professor Granovetter wrote the seminal paper regarding tiered layers of family, relatives, and friends and associates. His work focused upon the third tier and how it related to our professional and personal lives. The title of that paper was The Strength of Weak Ties. It's probably the most cited sociology paper ever. Whereas NANOG as a professional community was begun as a way to share common issues on developing internet networks and finding best solutions, its roots kind of eschew the transactional nature of relationships being used for personal gain. Many of you know those people who would say you'd never do that. Yet people being people has slowly began to take shape. Now we see a kind of a hybrid model, avoiding the straight, ugly sales conference, chamber of commerce meetings like the old Comdexes up to PTC, where naked capitalism trades relations as purely transactional in nature, versus the early kind of ethos of technical forms like IETF and the early nanogs, where writing rough code and breaking things up regards for building personal networks was kind of the community structure. I think, frankly, with social events now being put together by NANOG, NANOG's adopting the NANOG way, which is a hybrid. So I'd like to introduce Mark Granovetter, and I mean this is my sincerest honor and pleasure to introduce him. He is a professor of sociology at Stanford University. He previously taught at Johns Hopkins University, Harvard University, and State University of New York, Stony Brook, and Northwestern University. At the time of his undergraduate studies in history at Princeton, he had consuming interest in the ways that individual actions, social networks, and social institutions interact with and shape each other. It's focused on the actors who tried to find and solve problems, not with simple rational strategies, but rather as pragmatists, assembling ideas and practices from their social environments. His first approach to these questions led him to the analysis of social networks. His widely cited 1973 paper, The Strength of Weak Ties, showed how weak rather than strong ties bridges cliques that might otherwise be disconnected, thus conveying information to individuals about jobs, rumors, and discoveries about which they may otherwise be unaware. This led to his 1974 book, Getting a Job, pursued his theme exploring the role of social networks in labor markets. His models of collective behavior in which small differences in distribution of individual thresholds for action might lead to huge differences in collective outcomes, focused on the nonlinear, the relation between causes and social outcomes. Since the mid-1980s, he has focused on the sociology of the economy, beginning with the 1985 paper, Economic Action and Social Structure, the Problem of Embeddedness. His recent book, Society and Economy, explores how trust, social norms, power, and the details of networks accumulate into macro-level institutions that then shape what individuals do. The first volume, published in 2017, set out the theoretical framework, while his forthcoming second will use this framework to illustrate the study of such important topics and cases as the role and variety of personal relationships in the economy, corruption, corporate governance, organizational form, and the emergence of new industries like American electricity industry and the high-tech industry of Silicon Valley. Again, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Granovetter. So what we want to actually try to figure out is how professional networks kind of work through this and have people kind of ask questions in a very interactive way. But I'm sure you've looked at professional level job systems, and I can look around the room. I know quite a few people who've told me they've never gotten a job from applying directly. So how has that research changed, or with LinkedIn and other structures keeping us warmer with reduced people? How does that kind of look to you?
Well, it's interesting. It turns out that if I can talk about how people find spouses for a moment, there's a very old literature showing that the way people met their spouses was through friends of friends, or relatives of friends, or friends of relatives. And that apparently is no longer the case, because starting around maybe 2011, 2012, there's some research on this that's been done by a colleague of mine, Michael Rosenfeld. People now are more likely to find spouses through dating applications like Match.com and OkCupid and so on. So in this question of how people find spouses, it is no longer seems to be through personal networks. It seems to be through these applications online. That does not seem to be the way that it's gone for people finding jobs. Historically, people found jobs through acquaintances and friends and relatives, predominantly, and that's just to be the case. So that does not seem to have shifted over to finding jobs through LinkedIn and Facebook and so on. In fact, and one of the findings that some of you will know about if you've read any of my papers is that people are especially likely to find jobs through ties that are surprisingly weak. So that's one of the elements of the strength of weak ties. And that still seems to be true. And in fact, you might say, we can guess, but we don't have the solid research on this yet, that because Facebook and so on, LinkedIn, they make it easier to keep up with people that we might have lost track of in the past, that people are even more likely, I suspect now, to find their jobs through their social networks than they were before. And they don't find them through job boards or listings on LinkedIn. LinkedIn and Facebook may help people keep up with the people that they used to know, used to work with 5, 10, 20 years ago even. But it's very different from the way people find spouses, and because it still seems to be the case that people are finding their jobs through personal acquaintances. Why it's different for spouses than it is for jobs is something that we need to get some solid research done on. I've been trying to persuade my students to do that research. I haven't been successful yet, but I'm going to keep pushing them.
So I'm going to put this out to people. Is anyone in the last 5 years gotten a job purely through the people they knew at Nanog, where I heard it earlier, you could have stood up on a Tuesday and say at lunch, I'll be looking, and how soon are people contacting you? I'm curious. Chris? Yeah. Anyone else that obviously feels like it didn't take long to get your phone to ring? So, I mean, that's kind of this professional environment, and that's what I'm hoping this we can actually lend to research. And if Professor Granovetter is ever interested, Nanog would be a fertile breeding ground because we have, I don't know how many connections in common I have with you, Chris. Chris and I know each other a little bit, but not really tight, but we know each other. But I'm sure there's hundreds of connections we have in common. So have you, Professor, have you ever looked at these rings of connections that people have where they're similar? There's a lot of overlap in our industry. Have you ever kind of dug into that, where the strength of the weak ties is kind of goes interestingly in a group, almost like a herd?
I have not looked into that myself. You know, when I did my research on how people found jobs, I talked to them. In many cases, I went to their homes to interview them. In some cases, I did it through surveys. I found out how they found their job, whether it was through personal contact or not, which for professional technical managerial workers, it was indeed through a personal contact. 60 or 70% of the time, that was by far the predominant way of finding jobs. I found out what kind of contact it was, what I didn't do, and you know, I had some limitations because this was a doctoral dissertation. I had limited time and limited funding for this. So I found out what kind of personal contact led them to their job. I was not able to do research on what the entire network around those contacts looked like. And I don't think anyone has ever done that. That would be very difficult, complicated, time-intensive work, although it probably would be more feasible to do it now than it was way back then, because we have the ability to deal with what we call big data much more efficiently than we could in the old days. But as far as I know, no one has done that yet, and I certainly didn't do it in my original research.
And if you mind asking, in reading all your stuff again, I was stunned how open people were when you went to talk to them. You actually reached out, and people were happy to tell you where they got their jobs from.
Oh, yes. You know, this was the old days when you didn't have to, you know, these days, if you want to go and talk to people personally, you have to go first through the Committee on Human Subjects, and then you have to send people a letter saying that their participation is voluntary, and if they have any questions, they can contact so-and-so and so-and-so, and you have to show that you're not going to do them any harm. This was the old days when you didn't have to do that. And so I chose a random sample of people in Newton, Massachusetts, which is a kind of upper middle class suburb where there are a lot of professional technical managerial workers. And I chose a random sample. In my book, I explain how I chose the sample. And I sent letters to these people. And the letter said, you've entered my sample. We're very interested in how you found your job. And I'm coming to your house to interview you in the next couple of weeks. So that is, you know, I didn't say, would that be okay? Can we make an appointment? I just said, I'm coming.
But people were open to it, weren't they? They enjoyed talking to you.
Well, it really surprised me. I assumed that the hard part would be getting into people's homes to talk to them. Turned out that the hardest part was getting out, because people really, they really like to talk about themselves. They like to talk about their own experiences. And I was asking them questions that no one had ever asked them before. And so they were really interested in talking about it. And I found that most people had stories about how they found jobs through personal contacts. And for the people I interviewed personally, I took them back to the job before this one and the job before that one, and all the way back to the beginning of their career, ask them about each job change and how it had happened. And for some of them, it was like a light went on in their heads because they realized that most of the jobs they've gotten, and most of the times they changed from one job to another, it was through their personal networks. And they hadn't actually ever put it together before. And some of them were like, oh my God, my whole life has been controlled by my networks. And they found this surprising and illuminating. Maybe one or two found it disturbing because maybe they had the illusion that it was all about how talented or skilled you were. But most of them were just found it really interesting to learn that about themselves. And for me as a researcher, the fact that I could help people learn something new about themselves was incredibly rewarding because researchers always are trying to do that. And I don't think we succeed all that often. So I was really so happy to find that out.
So the reason why I brought that up is because the human nature aspect. Did you ever actually look for the people that recommended so if these people were finding it through their connections, how frequently do you talk to those people that helped them about how much they enjoyed it? The strangeness of someone willingly letting you in the house, and you, as you said, getting out was the hard part. I think the human nature thing is people that are through these connections, they're happy to make recommendations if they have a positive opinion of you. Have you ever talked to any of those people?
Well, there was a very severe budget constraint and a time constraint, and so I couldn't systematically do that. But in a few cases, I did contact those people just to get a little more information. One of the questions I ask people is why they think people are willing to make those references. And people had a variety of different explanations. One of them said to me, well, didn't you ever want to do something nice for somebody? And so I think for some of the people, it was like what you just suggested, that they are happy to do it. In some cases, it was different. In some cases, it was probably more instrumental. One person I spoke to, I asked him why he thought the person recommended him for the job. And he said about the person who recommended him that he was the kind of person who likes to put people in places. So there's quite a variety of reasons that people have for passing this information along. But I didn't systematically find out that information because I only talked to a couple of those people. And if I'd had unlimited time and unlimited budget, then I would have traced it back to the employer. I would have found out who told this person, my respondent, about the job, and then I would find out how that person found out about it, and I would go back to the original source. But I didn't have time to do that, and I didn't have the budget to do that. And as far as I know, no one has done that since. So it's been a long time. There's been a lot of research on this subject, but no one has really done this systematically in the way that you just suggested it should be done, and I agree it should be done that way. But, there's a lot of research in this world that hasn't been done and still should be done, and that's one of the subjects that is kind of crying out for more research.
So the last one that I thought, and then I'll open up, is there is a darker undertone of exclusion here, the diversity issue of your network. So if you're connected networks, or if you look at your LinkedIn network or your Facebook network, there's a kind of homogenous nature to it, and the willingness to increase or reach out to people who are not part of your core constituency. Have you seen, or you talked about once, I think I saw a video of you speaking about the lack of diversity in social networks that people then lean on, and so that creates a different candidate pool for as we go along.
Yes, I think that's right. So if you have a candidate, if the people who are in a job and who work with you are all very similar to you in terms of race and ethnicity and religion and so on, then those are the people you're going to call on, and it's going to replicate that same situation. So one of the reasons that people who are different in their race or their ethnicity or their religion from the people already in the workplace, one of the reasons why they have trouble getting into that workplace is that there aren't any people who look like them in the workplace. And so one thing I suggested in the second edition of my book, Getting a Job, in the afterword, was that one of the things that affirmative action programs might accomplish is to seed places with people who are different, who are diverse from the people who are already there. And once those people are there, chances are that they will know people who look like themselves, who want to get into that workplace, and that they will bring those people in. And if that keeps happening, then it may be that affirmative action programs are self-limiting, that they are a kind of, they jumpstart the process, but once that's taken place, the natural way that people find jobs takes over, and you may not need to do that anymore. So I think that's one of the things that people don't understand about, affirmative action programs, is that they may be just a way to get a process started, and it may not be something you have to keep doing. And I think if people understood that, there'd be much less resistance to it.
So I guess I'm going to throw out a challenge to everyone to try to purposely increase your networks, or reach out to people, or have people you work with reach out to people, because that does create those layers and tiers of connections. It's a push. We'll do that for another day over like socials or something. All right, so please, rare occasion to ask someone who is truly, and again, like a fanboy, this is one of the greatest experts I've ever had the pleasure to talk to. So if you're interested, this is the chance to actually really speak to somebody about the vicissitudes of your social networks, your interactions, how you use it, how people historically used it. Please, don't be shy. No one should be shy of a mic. Please just identify yourself, since that way you'll know who is talking.
Good day. I'm Scott Johnson from AS32639. My question would be, would your advice be similar or parallel for those who are not job seeking but engaging in startup activities?
Well, I think there it's a different question. I think the question is how you're going to find the people to work with that are going to make your startup really succeed. Because, as I'm sure you know, the failure rate for startups is upward of 90%. We don't have good data on that because there's no good database on startups, but that's the figure that people most often suggest. So I think the question is how to find the right people to staff your startup. Well, there's two questions. One is how to find people to fund it. Those are less likely to be people you know, but there may be people you know who know those people, and then that's certainly worth exploring. If you're doing angel investors or seed round or round A and B and so on. And it's also critical to get the right couple of people to work with you. And I think for the vast majority of startups, people choose people that they know, that they have worked with, that they were students with. And I think you have to really think carefully about who is in your network that you've ever worked with or known, whose skills you really know and whose personality you really know, that you think would be successful to work with you on this. And I think that successful startups have figured that out. And I think the ones that fail are often ones where the founders can't stop fighting with each other, and they discover that they're not compatible. But I think they thought about it before they got into it. They might have realized that they're incompatible and that they need to find someone who, of course you want someone with the right skills, but you also want someone that you're compatible with, that you can work with, that is going to be someone that you're comfortable with. And I think that maybe people don't understand that, and they don't value that enough, and they just think in terms of purely technical skills. And of course, there's more than that needed to have a successful startup.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Hi, Chris Woodfield from DriveNets. Thank you very much for giving this talk. One thing that tends to happen a lot with people that are part of social networks, especially professional networks, more so than personal networks, but not unique to either, is finding a balance of how a community benefits from your presence in the network versus your own personal benefit from being in the network. Personally, I always worry that I'm asking too much of my colleagues, of my professional contacts, and I feel like I'm not putting in enough personal energy, so to speak, to justify benefiting from that. Classic imposter syndrome. I'm sure I'm not unique here. On the other hand, you have people that really only leverage their contacts when they need something, and the givers and the takers, to put it simply. What advice would you have for people that worry about that ask, am I asking too much of my colleagues, or worrying that they're not putting in enough or putting in too much?
Well, it's hard to know what general advice to give. I think you have to pretty much figure out how much you know about people that you're working with. If there are people who are so giving and so energetic that it's almost impossible to ask too much of them. And there are other people who are touchy and difficult and want to do everything their own way, and then anything you ask of them is too much. And so I think that, we know a certain amount about each of the people we work with, but I think that what we really need to think about is how much we know about that aspect of them, how much they're willing to give, and how touchy they are, and how difficult they are, or how, conversely, whether they're the kind of people who just can't do too much for you. And we know a little bit about people like that, and I think we have to kind of feel our way with those people, with both kinds of people, and figure out what kind of people they are. If we know it ahead of time, then we have no doubt. But there are always going to be some people we're working with that we don't know all that well, and I think we just have to figure out bit by bit where they are in that continuum of people who can't do enough for you, or people who anything they do for you is too much. And so I think that's what we have to try to learn about people, and I think you can only learn it bit by bit with people you don't know very well. And so I think there's a fine art to that, and I think it's one that some people are still figuring out. I'm still figuring it out. And I don't think there's any simple recipe for that, but I think that's the issue you have to think about.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go back and use a little bit more time before, and well, go ahead, Anna.
One question from me. Thank you very much for your talk. I found myself in the marketplace out of the blue last year. I was also part of a startup that didn't do well. So I found myself on exactly the opposite side. So I'm an extrovert. I'm very sociable. I have a massive social network on LinkedIn. Yet I really, really struggled to put myself out there and ask for help, ask for recommendations, ask for introductions. So what would you advise? I'm a special case. I'm an extrovert, like I said. There's many other people who are introverts, right? Like they still cannot do the same thing. So how would you deal with that? What would your advice be for that? How could we handle this, this uncertainty of putting ourselves out there?
Well, that's a difficult question, and it's not one that I'm necessarily qualified to answer, because that's more of a psychological issue, and it is very difficult to put yourself out there, and especially in a vulnerable position. But I think one of the things that I did find in my research is that people found that people that they hardly knew were surprisingly helpful. And in fact, the less you know them, the more things they know that you don't know. And so I think that it's people might find it implausible to contact people that they hardly know, that they worked with X years ago, and they knew then, but they haven't been in touch with, or they've barely been in touch with. But those are the kinds of people who may be more helpful than you expect. So I think that rather than the likely suspects, the people that come to mind immediately when you think, who will I contact? I think you should think about who's out there on the edges of your network that you haven't been in much touch with, and they may know things that are surprisingly relevant. So I think that's that's difficult because you may not feel entirely comfortable, but you can just do it in a casual way, I think. And so I think that would be, if I were in the business of giving advice, which I'm not, but if I were, that would be what I would suggest.
Coincidentally, this is exactly what happened. I did find the courage to reach out to people at the edge of my network that I just felt a tiny bit more at ease to contact, more casually. And actually, I did get a referral from somebody who had zero obligation to refer me. He just knew who I was. We had worked a bit in the past together. No other communication whatsoever, and that's how everything worked out in the end. So this is exactly what happened. Thank you very much. I forgot to say my name. Sorry, again. Anna Balsami from Akamai. Thank you.
Very nice to meet you.
So I'm going to steal a little bit of your time at the end, because you wrote Society and Economy, your first treatise into it in 2017, and you're working on what sounds like an amazingly interesting thing. So it affects the high-tech industry, is what you're looking at, as on a macro level. How are you doing that research? What is it that maybe we in this community can help you with? How are you pulling data for that? Because I was trying to figure out, that almost seems like you're hammering Jello to a wall. It would be very hard to detail.
Yes, well, I do try to avoid the hammering of Jello because it's not a very rewarding occupation. My method of research for this book is to be a parasite. Instead of doing my own research, I try to read every conceivable thing that other people have done that might be relevant to what I'm looking at, and try to put it all together. And so for me, that's a lot of fun. You never know where it's going to take you. So, for example, I've been reading about feudalism in medieval France recently, and you may wonder, what has that got to do with any of these things? And it turns out that the kind of relationships these people had were quite interesting. And they were an example of how personal relationships mediate the economy. I read a lot about slavery in ancient Rome. Turns out that most of the businesses in ancient Rome were run by slaves or former slaves on behalf of the owners of the businesses. And that's probably the only economy where that ever took place, but that was a very big, important economy for hundreds, and even for many hundreds of years. And so that's my method, such as it is, which is to piggyback on all these fascinating studies that so many people have done on so many different times and places, and understand how the economy works. Because, of course, ancient Rome is very different from the United States in the 21st century. But there are certain things that are in common, and those are that if you own a business and you need help in running it, you have to have somebody you can trust. In the case of ancient Rome, it turned out that the only people you could trust were your slaves or your former slaves. In the 21st century United States, happily, we no longer have slaves. But there are other things we have to consider in figuring out who the trustworthy people are and what we can expect them to do, what kind of relationship we've had with them. So time and place change enormously, but the fundamental problems don't. And so this question of how you can run a business requires you to find people you can trust and people who have the right skills and you have to know something about those people. And so that never changes. It's just that the details change a lot, but the underlying fundamental principles don't change. And so that's what I'm trying to find out about in this book.
Anyone else have any questions? Because I could ask questions all day, but I don't want to use up all our time. So if anyone has thoughts, this is, like I said, my fanboy moment. And Professor, you don't realize that I've been very involved in internet networks for years. This is a hobby that I absolutely adore. So some of my friends are laughing at me because they know how much this is actually a private thing I've cared about. Anything? Oh, in a shy room, I will say thank you so very, very much for your time. I wish you could have been here. Not that it is a unique community. I will share that with you, that if you look for unique community where writing rough code was the way of you proving your capabilities, and it was once you got to a level of capabilities, you were part of a community, and it's a unique world because it's the I guess the way I would put it is the stakes are so high. We have people here from almost every one of the large internet companies or supporting applications, and if they don't do their job right, you read about it the next day.
And even if they do their job right, you might read about it the next day, because all the big companies have been shedding employees at an alarming rate. So it's a tricky world out there, as you all know.
I think some of the social contracts with large companies that were hiring qualified engineers, it was an unwritten deal that said if you do your job for years, you'll be fine. And that in the last year has really remarkably changed.
Yeah, unfortunately.
All right. Thoughts? Anyone? Any questions before we let them go? Going once, going twice. Again, thank you so very much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for staying with us for the next portion. This is going to be a discussion about what happens after that day that you've been let go. There's been a RIF and a layoff, whatever that might be, the circumstances of that exit might be. But I'm really excited to have these folks joining us with us. So Anna, it's nice to meet you in person. And Chris Woodfield, I'm so sorry, here to share their personal experiences with layoffs. And I'm interested to get your insights and your feedback. I know everybody's journey through a layoff is different, and these insights can help everyone in the crowd. And then we've got James Mackey. He's got it's the number one podcast as far as talent acquisition, and he has some great insights about what it is from an employer's perspective, what to expect from you as a candidate as he goes into companies and helps them create processes and best practices for the hiring process. So there's a new movement to improve a candidate experience and share a roadmap or rules of engagement about what you can expect from the moment you apply, somehow your resume gets into the system, and all the way to an offer letter. So time frames, things like that. So welcome, everyone. I appreciate your time. All right. So, sorry. I've got my cheat sheet here. I'll come down here. All right. So, James, you and I have both helped a lot of people during layoffs, and it's, what we do is important to help people find their next step. And if it's not with, for example, for me, if it's not with my organization, I really want to help you find your next step. So I'm going to share your resume with other people, of course, with your permission, with other hiring managers or HR professionals in the industry. So, James, from your expert opinion, what are you looking for when someone's laid off, and what are you expecting from a candidate during the hiring process? Like your expectations.
So one of the most important things that I think job seekers and really just anyone who's looking to, I suppose, optimize their career trajectory is to understand that a lot of employers are going to have a bias toward hiring folks that are in their network, part of some type of community. So I think, one of the most important things that everyone could be doing is ideally before a potential layoff happens to invest in community. And we have to stop thinking of folks as professional acquaintances or people that we're networking with and start to really understand that we need to develop actual friendships, right? It's one of those things where you don't have to appeal to everyone, right? When you join these communities, similar to what we're doing today at this conference, you want to find your people, the folks that you get along with, that you're enjoying going to the socials with, and just invest in those relationships. You don't have to talk to everyone, right? Like, it's not like, as engineers, we need to, or you guys need to act like salespeople, right? It's just finding the folks that you relate with and building genuine friendships. And the reason that that's so important before a layoff is that if a layoff happens, you already have those genuine friendships in place. Versus if you're doing that post layoff, it can feel a little bit forced if the first thing you do when you meet somebody is make an ask. Now, it's not the end of the world if you haven't been investing in relationships proactively, but there's other tactics that we can discuss today to overcome that. But one of the things that I think, from an employer perspective or an investor perspective, if we're talking about, I know some folks mentioned startup and growth stage companies, investors, executives are telling hiring managers it's typically better to go with a known quantity. So that is something to keep in mind. So I think that's going to give you a huge advantage. And that's something that, again, whether right or wrong, it's not necessarily always based on competency. Sometimes it's a combination of competency plus the fact that somebody can verify. Like the aspect of being able to verify competency is just important as actually being competent. So that's just what they got to think about.
Yeah, that's great. So for Chris and Anna, can you share with us, was it an email? Was it a phone call? How did that happen? If you can share it. And what did you do? Like, what was your first thing? Oh my gosh, did I cry? Did I whatever? And then what were your actions that you took to start the job search?
Okay. So I was notified on a Friday morning that my position was being eliminated from my prior employer. I had an inkling that was going to be happening, but it was, maybe 24, 40 hours of, this is something that might actually happen. So I guess there had been a little bit of mental preparation, but not very much. But honestly, the day one thing I did was, okay, I'm going to go back to bed. Because, I just had to think about it. I was like, what can you do right now? And the first thing you can, anyone who thinks, all right, I have to jump into this really fast, and you need to take a little bit of time for yourself, because it's a shock, and you need to at least let yourself reel a little bit and think about things. Just think about things a little bit. And when I say think about things, I don't mean let the voices in your head tell you that you deserve this, or why me? Oh, because you're a poor performer. Because rarely is that true. Most layoffs are extremely impersonal. Probably, going back an old story, I remember sitting in a room with a hiring man at a current job I was in, where a suggestion had been come up to a recent company had performed a large layoff, and maybe we should look up some of the people that were laid off from that other company. And the manager said, well, why would I want people who have just been let go from their last job? They're not going to be the best performers. Terrible advice. Terrible outlook. Because I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but 99% of the time, the people making decisions on who to lay off are not your direct managers. They're probably not even your manager's managers. They're HR, they're VP, SVP, director level people that probably have never even met you. So, the first thing I did was kind of convince myself that this wasn't personal. And that was a Friday, which meant I kind of had the weekend to do that. And then it wasn't until Monday that I really started to, to start to look, okay, what do I want to do? What sort of industries am I looking at? Do I want to stay with the same business segment I'm in, or try to change things up a little bit? And reached out to some colleagues, had some good discussions, and then sort of made a general plan from there.
My case was a bit different. I was working for a startup, and I had already survived a wave of layoffs that happened a year earlier, which was actually very, very poorly handled, to say it politely. It was a 4-minute Zoom call, and it was a case of, if you get this message, then you no longer work for the company. So I survived this wave of layoffs, but the light bulb came up, right? This could happen to me at any point. And I was also adamant that all of us in our career in this industry, I think, will face at least one layoff at some point in our career. So a year went on. In complete contrast to how the first set of layoffs was handled, it was completely the opposite at the end. So we already knew that financially we were struggling a bit as a company. We knew that we were trying to secure some new investment. We knew that we were trying to find some lifeline, right? And thankfully, from the leadership, we had continuous updates. And I remember it was some point last May, one Friday, that was the deadline. And we were hoping to get on our all hands, and the CEO saying, "Yeah, we got it. We got the lifeline that we needed." And unfortunately, we didn't. And I remember, as much as I was prepared, I did have a feeling of emptiness, if that makes sense. I had so many things going on. I had open conversations with my vendors, partners. I had the orders to sign. I had many things going on. And then suddenly I'm like, I can't do anything on that anymore. So the first feeling was that of just emptiness, just like draining something from inside me.
So did you take time to yourself?
Yes. So as most of us do, and me being a bit more extroverted as well in that sense, I posted on LinkedIn that this happened, and I'm going to start looking for a job. At the time, I didn't know. I mean, obviously, I wanted a job, right? Everybody wants to have an income, right? At the time, I didn't think about it. I just posted it like everybody else was posting the same thing at the end of the day. The same day that I posted my LinkedIn message, I got 30 offers for interviews. I had to keep track of them.
That's awesome.
It was all offers for jobs I didn't want. And that was the problem, right? I was at the time, as much as I loved my previous job, but I was still having what I call a residual burnout from a previous role, which was I had not dealt with. And the moment I saw all these offers, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to go back to that. I'm not ready to go back to a previous role. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to take it easy. I'm going to have conversations with every single person that contacted me. I'm going to see what's out there and then make my decision. And the more I did that, the more I realized that I really didn't like any of these offers, interview offers. It wasn't real job offers. I realized that I still had to do a bit of work to understand what I wanted to do. And I kept feeling that if I didn't honor myself, if that makes sense, I was going against my own integrity. So as much as most likely I should have gotten the first job that came my way, right? I was feeling that this is the wrong thing to do. So completely by coincidence, I had already planned some holiday, and I just left. I went away for a month. I was in Europe. I'm from Greece. Then came back at some point in August and said, okay, now I'm going to start. And it was a door in the face, right? Because I was not the only one without a job. Startups were closing one after the other. There were already thousands of people on the market. And that's when, I needed to organize myself. Like I said earlier, if you heard me, I have a massive social network, right? I have presence at Nanog. I participate. I'm sociable and all that. Yet honestly, the idea of knocking on somebody's door and saying, you know what, keep me in mind, it was such a struggle. And I also had this, I was very much in my head. I thought, everybody knows I'm unemployed. I've posted it on LinkedIn. They should be coming to me and telling me, you know what, do you need any help? And at some point I had an epiphany, and I'm like, people have their own jobs and their own things to worry about. They're not going to worry about you, right? So I had to organize myself a bit. Things don't just fall on your lap always. So, like I said earlier in the conversation with the professor, I reluctantly starting to contact people at the edge of my network, people that I've worked with in the past, who were my customers from my previous job. And little by little, these little opportunities started popping up. And I had convinced myself that I'm not going to say yes to anything. I'm going to hear to whatever everybody has to say, to propose as a potential job, have an open mind, and see how that goes, right? And I can go on for hours. As you can tell, I talk a lot. Eventually, I got to the point where I had in front of me 3 offers. I went through some interview processes. I had 3 offers, and I had to choose the one that matched my personality best and my skills best and what I was looking for in a job. And like I said, it really came from the edge of my network, somebody who had zero obligation to help me. He said, you know what, I think you would be really good at this role. Why don't I'll put your name down. And that's how it happened.
So one thing I'd like to point out about using your network is referrals don't only benefit the candidate. So as a referring employee, usually you're incentivized with a referral bonus. So embrace the vulnerability, ask for the referral, reach out to your network. If you find someone that works at that company where you might be interviewing or you see a job posted, do the outreach, and they will want to help you. I mean, like I said earlier, human nature, we want to help each other. It is hard to ask for help, particularly when, you're also prominent in this industry, and the vulnerability that it takes to have that ask. Chris, how did you find your job?
So there's a simple answer and a longer answer. The simple answer is through the Nanog community, to be honest. There were the company I'm now working for already had several prominent members of the Nanog program committee board, other colleagues that were there and had very good things to report about the experience, and that made a lot of difference between evaluating the opportunity I did take and other opportunities that were available to me. Not to say that there weren't, there were a number of good opportunities. I think this one just felt, the product and the fit of the technology needs compared to what I felt that I could offer to the company I'm working for now. It seemed like probably the best fit possible of the value of the different opportunities that I had. But the longer answer is that I've been fortunate enough to be able to come to NANOG meetings, and I'm also active in the Aaron community. And as someone said, the best time to plant a tree is 15 years ago. The next best time is today. But but it really was. I agree with what Anna said. Everyone assumes when you're someone who's been in this industry a long time. I've got 25 years in this industry. I'm not going to, without getting into ahead, there's a lot of people that know my name, and everyone assumes, oh, he'll be fine. He'll find a new place. And so, and it's easy to, even though but I never feel that. I never feel like, I don't get the big hood over that. If you ask anyone objectively, they would say that. But, the idea of me going and, asking, hey, is this position open? The first thing I think of is they're going to say, why do you need my help to find a job? And that's kind of humbling. You have to say, all right, I know that you think I'm doing really well, really prominent, but no, I need your help. And you were right about the sign-on bonuses and the benefits of a referral. It's not just a matter of, but it's not just the incentives that someone might get for referring a candidate. It's also hey, I get to work with someone that I like and respect. So people ask me to refer them, and I'll admit there's a bit of a filter there, because it's not just a matter of getting the bonus. It's okay. Am I going to want to work with this person? And most of the time that's yes. But you do have to put that little filter on it. I think if I talk about my experience finding a new job, the one thing I'll say was that I am an imposter syndrome poster child. Like I said, the first thing you think of when you're laid off is, why me? And of course, it's like, obviously they, someone finally found the imposter and cast me out. We heard her talk about that yesterday. So I had to remind myself, hey, this is how layoffs are done. It's not personal. But seeing the amount of as Anna said, I saw the same thing. 30. I logged into LinkedIn, clicked the open to work button that put the banner on my profile, and had 30 messages in a day, probably more. I lost count. And LinkedIn's great for that, but you got to weed through it all, because it's people are just the recruiters. I mean, obviously it's their job to find candidates, but it's a very impersonal. Okay, this is the criteria I'm searching for. Search by criteria, send them all a message. They don't know who you are. So you really do have to weed through that. And in the end, the filter I had was, what do I know this company? Do I know people that work there? Only in, there was one or two cases where, okay, that seems like an interesting business to be in. Maybe I'll have a conversation with them. But in the end, I spoke to, getting to the point of speaking to someone in person, limited to, I think there were 5 companies I talked to in person over the course of about 2 months before winning it down to the company I decided to take an offer from.
James, I have a question for you. What mistakes are you seeing candidates make as they're going through the process?
So I think the biggest mistake that candidates are probably making once they enter the interview process is making the assumption that at the end of an interview, the interviewer is going to know without any doubt that they are highly competent at their role. And the reason for this is because a lot of companies, when they're hiring, they don't have very good structure to their interview process. they don't necessarily have custom questions built out that they're asking to every single candidate and that they're asking in the same way. So the process is filled with bias and inefficiencies. And so what's really important is to do something called pre-framing. And pre-framing is when you enter an interview before the interviewer dives into their questions, to ask the interviewer a couple questions yourself, and to say, "Hey, look, I'm really excited to speak with you today. I'd love to get a pulse on what you're going to be evaluating and that what we need to cover in order for us to determine if this is the right position or the right fit for us to move forward to the next round." Because you want to essentially create a map and you want to know where the treasure is, right? Like, versus making an assumption about what the interviewer cares about. Like, you might be highly competent at what you do, but the interviewer hopefully understands their environment pretty well. So you don't want to make the assumptions when they ask you a question. You might go down a rabbit hole answer that is completely different than what they're looking for. And so you always want to figure out what it is that they're actually looking for, and then you can dial in your answers into what you know matters to them, and you can not talk about the stuff that maybe you find to be important, but that they don't. So I think that that's a huge thing that, a lot of the times I don't think it's typical for people that are interviewing to ask a question at the beginning. The other thing that I would say is at the end of the interview, I would say something to the effect of, "Hey, I really enjoyed speaking with you today. From your perspective, does this seem to be a good fit for us to move forward?" And that way you're collecting feedback on the spot. And if the hiring manager says something to the effect of, "Well, yeah, I think this X, Y, and Z is very much so aligned. However, I didn't get a pulse, or it doesn't sound like you've done this or one other thing." If it turns out you have done that thing, then you have an opportunity on the spot to address it. And the issue is that if you don't, they're not going to figure it out. And then 2 weeks later, you get the email saying that they passed because you don't have XYZ skill set when you do. Like, I don't know if anybody here has ever been passed on for a role because they were told that they didn't have part of the skill set, and you're just like, "Yeah, I do." It's because that, again, most interview processes are highly ineffective. The last thing that I would say is very important to do is to communicate, whether at the end of the interview or in the follow-up email that you send, to let them know where you're at in the interview process with other companies. This serves two purposes. One, it's kind of a cool opportunity for you to brag a little bit. Like, if you're approaching the final rounds with a few other companies, let them know. You don't have to necessarily tell them the names of the companies unless you want to. But say something to the effect of, "Hey, I'm entering the second round, third round with this company. It looks like we would be potentially moving to an offer stage within the next 2 weeks. And I'm just letting you know as we're moving forward in the process so we can be aligned with that, should we decide to move forward." And I never say, like, should you decide to move forward or do you think it's a good fit? It's always about we and us. That's an executive level conversation where you're looking at this as a partnership, and they're going to pick up on that. And they're going to view the relationship with you a little bit differently. So definitely make sure you tell them where you're at in the process. The other reason this is really important is when you're reviewing more than one offer at a time. A lot of people have been in a situation where you get one offer, but you're waiting on the other offer, but you're 2 weeks out from getting that offer. And then it's like awkward delaying with the company because you don't want to make them feel like you're not interested, but you want to see all the offers. And so by communicating with all the companies that you're interviewing with, when you're going to be nearing the end of the process, you can hopefully put yourself in a position where you are able to evaluate a few offers side by side, which I think a lot of us, if not most, have been in that situation where that's not always possible. So, and even when you do this, it's not always possible, but it sure as hell helps, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Yep.
Pass down.
Go for it.
I just want to say, I think it really matters where you are in your career as well. If you are just beginning to have your interviews, and actually this matters to Nanog as well, right? We have a lot of newcomers, new starters, new engineers, right? So it really matters where you are. So I feel that I have a lot of experience interviewing. I always say I interview very well, right? And I do. I actually enjoy the process. It takes a lot of practice to get to the point where you have the confidence to treat the interview as an equal opportunity. For me, and I say that in what sense? For me, an interview is a 50-50 process, right? You're interviewing me, I'm interviewing you exactly the same, right? But to get to that point, you have to have the experience, you have to have the confidence to put yourself out there, and also to the confidence to stand for what you're looking for, stand for what matters to you, right? And that's something that comes with practice. So I think it's important to say that, because as a younger engineer myself, as a younger employee, I would just say yes to everything, right? I wasn't standing up for myself. And that took a lot of interviews and a lot of doors and feedback. Thankfully, I was asking for feedback to get to the point where, you know what, I'm actually doing you as much of a favor as you do, right? So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and following what you said, I mean, when we talk about our job hunt experiences, one thing I have to remind myself is, I have to do a serious privilege check. Not everybody has been in this business as long as I have. Not everybody has the levels of experience that will give you the, I'll call it a privilege of having multiple offers to choose from. And we need to be sensitive to the fact that not everybody is in a position where they can hold off waiting on a second job offer that might be coming in if they've got one in hand. Depending on your personal situation, that might not be an option. And don't feel like you failed because you can't, you don't have those 10 offers rolling in and everybody beating down your door, because that's not how it happened even for me. But and if you're in a situation that doesn't give you that luxury, that's fine. And I'm not going to diminish that experience by my own experience. But find the leverage you can find to, whatever that is, even if it's in a small way. If you have options, find the options you do have and make the best of them.
Well, thanks so much. I'd like to open it up to questions. If anyone out here in the audience has a question for any of us on the panel from an employee perspective or a hiring manager perspective.
Alan Young, self-employed or unemployed. So I see lots of positions on LinkedIn that are available, but I'm not entirely sure there's headcount behind those positions. And I recently, 2-3 weeks ago, got laid off, and I didn't get the 30 messages, right? I've gotten a couple, and it's trickling here and there, and like lots of apologies. Yes, you got laid off, but what's the sense for? Are there jobs out there right now in sort of this industry?
Yeah, there's still a lot of open roles. So when you look at the unemployment rate in the tech industry, it's currently at 1.8%. And I know it can feel really scary when you're looking at layoffs in big tech and what a lot of us has experienced hands-on. But it is also important to remember that, you're going to land on your feet. There are still a lot of jobs out there. I would say that, yes, sometimes what's happening right now in the tech market is that because there's a lot of uncertainty and things are shifting so quickly, that a company might open a role like a month ago and then they change a hiring plan, particularly around this type of year, because you got to remember companies just for the most part did annual planning. They put out a new hiring plan. So maybe in Q4, they were thinking, okay, we're going to hire this much headcount, and then the CFO reevaluates for this new year. So you might see some of that happening. I would do filters by roles that have opened up in the last 7 days, and spend most of your time with that. And then also for the companies that you're applying for, check your network on LinkedIn and see if you happen to know anybody that either works for the company or is connected with somebody in the hiring manager. And obviously you can't do that with too many opportunities, but if you see something that like really speaks to you, that would be worthwhile as well.
No, I just wanted to say, because I've been in your shoes, I did get 30 offers, like I said, but it was all jobs that I did not want, right? So it was like zero. But what I want to say is, I agree, there's definitely a lot of openings out there, but there's a hiring freeze and a strategy change and waiting to see what happens with the rest of the tech industry in general. My advice is don't lose hope. I'm certain all these layoffs, like we said earlier, that are happening are not personal. They have nothing to do with your performance, who you are, what you bring on the table. So it's a waiting game. And while you wait, build that network, knock on these doors, redo your CV, learn something new. I started learning German. I had plenty of free time. I mean, I'm still rubbish at German, but I spent time learning a new language, right? So plenty of things to do, and it will come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One thing I'll add, and I saw that from both sides. There were positions I saw on LinkedIn that I thought might be interesting, even though I hadn't been recruited by that company that I applied for. And then I got a note saying that, sorry, that position's no longer open. So that absolutely happens. The one thing to remember, there is no such thing as a 100% hiring freeze. Companies announce, you see news about hiring freezes, or you might hear about that, but no company ever stops hiring completely. Only in, I'm not gonna say no, but extremely rare cases, almost all the time, a company that has said that they are in a hiring freeze, they're going to need people at some point, so they can't sustain that. And then, eventually there's enough attrition that they need, that just to get the job done, they need to bring in new people. So, that doesn't never, if you hear about the companies that have done hiring freezes or done layoffs, don't let that dissuade you from applying or from pursuing them, because almost no company stops hiring completely ever.
Yeah, there's a lot of the big tech companies that are still hiring amidst doing layoffs, which is pretty controversial. And a lot of people they're just like, what the hell? Like, why wouldn't we try to move people to different positions within the company? And the reality is that because they're not set up to do that, it's not a priority. In an upmarket, they're focused on growth. They're aggressive with that. They're not focused on optimizing talent management systems so that in a downturn, they can reallocate staff to different roles. Because the investors are thinking about, no, we want to scale revenues, stock prices, these types of things. So a lot of these big tech companies, they're very aggressive in a growth market and very aggressive in a down market. And it's more, I think they take it like it's easier for them to just do the approach of like overhiring in a sense, and then just going through cuts. The other thing to keep in mind is that there are real earnings pressure when it comes to stock prices and these types of things. But I think a lot of tech companies are also seeing this as an opportunity to make significant changes to their P&L at a time where they're not going to be judged as harshly for it, because layoffs are happening across all of tech. So when you look at the employment market, 1.8% in the tech industry, 3.5%, across the United States, that's still at a pretty, historical low, which is, should give everybody here some confidence that we're still, you're going to be able to bounce back. The other thing is indicators from inflation. December 6.5, January 6.2. So a lot of people in tech are, and this is kind of like an echo chamber, but a lot of the VCs are saying, over the next quarter to 2 quarters is stabilization. We're going to continue to see layoffs, but we're going to start to see a little bit of market stabilization within tech. And then Q3, Q4, we're going to start to see growth. It's not going to look like 2021. That's not going to happen again, at least for several years, if ever. That was artificially inflated because money was it was just so easy flowing, right? That people were just hiring, doing whatever, growing at all costs. And now we're basically, this is why we're having this correction in the tech markets, because so much money was flooded into tech. But anyways, we're going to see slow, hopefully more sustainable growth. But it's not doom and gloom. Like even investors that are very conservative and are going to tell founder CEOs, executive teams, board members, they're saying, they're not saying that, oh my God, the next 2 years, everything is doomsday, it's going to be awful. They're saying, no, conserve, increase your runway, decrease burn, focused on sustainable unit economics for the company. And we are hopefully expecting Q3, Q4 to start to grow again. So that's what everybody's saying. Of course, nobody actually really knows. I mean, we could make some assumptions, and there's some pretty smart folks that are saying this stuff, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily right. However, that's the stuff that I'm hearing.
Hi, Jeff Osborne, ISC. Earlier, the professor was saying something about the broken social contract, and I think that's really worth thinking about. I hire people mostly in my current job. I'm president of a nonprofit. I've hired hundreds and hundreds of people, and I've been laid off a lot of times. And I haven't had to write a resume since 1988 because the first layoff scared me so much. I basically went out and met everybody. And so the last time I was laid off, I literally called 2 dear, smart friends and arranged lunch. And both of them offered me jobs because I'd been working the field for so long. So the thing about planting the tree 15 years ago, do it now. The other one is I've usually worked 3 years in a startup, vested and got out and went somewhere else and had a really fun career. I've been doing this for 10 years because it's so fun. And still, I interview for jobs. The board knows it. My peers know it. My employees know it. I interview for jobs because I'm curious to know what's out there. I want to know how other people talk about jobs. I want to know what the pay levels are. If I got laid off tomorrow, I could have some really interesting things to do. And again, the social contract is broken. If you went out and got on OkCupid during your marriage every 3 months, it wouldn't last. But this is not that. They are out there willing to drop you at a moment's notice, and out the door you go. So don't forget that it's a two-way street. The last thing to say is I'm kept up nights when I have open recs because I'm desperately looking for a tier 3 support person who has intimate knowledge and about 20 years of DHCP experience troubleshooting and operationally. It keeps me up. The fact that there's a shy person out there qualified for that who isn't talking to all of their friends about, do you know anything like this, is kind of heartbreaking. So go out and ask because somebody else is losing sleep over you not having a job. Thank you.
Great point.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, Doug Kaneen, CCSI. First of all, I appreciate your vulnerability of standing up here and sharing some of your stories and your experiences. I think my question is probably directed first to James, but when it comes to whether it's length of time or the prominence of your role or anything else like that, what advice do you have to somebody who might find themselves like, how do you keep your personal/professional identity separated from the role that you're occupying? Depending on the prominence of the role you're in or the company you work for and things like that, you get laid off and now you gotta kind of like pull those two things apart. And so I think first I directed to you and then maybe both to Chris and Anna a little bit too.
So basically managing your professional and personal identity and segmenting that.
What kind of steps can you do to prepare before, like this type of thing happens to you? Like what things can you do in advance to make sure you keep those two things separated enough that you can pick them apart without, because like that, think about how crushing that is to have to move on. And then the how both of those roles, now you have to go this way and they go that way.
Okay. Got it. And I mean, so just like this is just more so like my opinion versus like data that I have within my company, right? Like my company, we work with 150 tech companies to help them hire. So this is more so just what I've seen from successful folks out there. I think just quite honestly, just being somewhat well-rounded and having some things outside of work, no matter how ambitious we are or how career focused we might be, is really important because there's going to be winter in every area, every part of our life. And so being somewhat well-rounded and investing in other things, whether it be family or hobbies or these types of things, I think are really important, but at the same time, not necessarily tying our identity to our career, which is quite honestly something that I've historically been terrible at. When I started my company, I basically assumed like if my business fails, then I'm going to die. Like literally, I'm not saying that's healthy, but like that's where my brain was. Like this is, the health of my business is my health, which is obviously very, it's not healthy at all, right? So there's been kind of an evolution of detaching from that and also accepting the fact that there's seasons. Like it doesn't matter how talented or skilled you are. you're going to experience different seasons. The most talented, brilliant, whether it be tech executives or anybody else, are going to have significant winters, huge challenges. That's never going to change from the beginning of our career to the end of their career. So to the extent that we can detach a little bit from that and just kind of expect that, like, this is just part of my career, and part of my job is to learn over time to the best of my ability, not perfectly, but to try to manage that. And then the other thing that I'll just say really quickly, it's kind of a correlated point, not exactly what you asked, but when it comes to relationships, I, to some extent, think it's important not to segment professional and personal. I think that a lot of folks are thinking from the perspective of, like, I have professional acquaintances and I have my personal friends. And I think, what you mentioned when you went out to lunch with two good friends and you both offered you jobs, I think it's important to remember that when you're at events like this, we're developing real, genuine friendships. And I think compartmentalizing and segmenting that too much is a missed opportunity. So I think from an identity perspective, 100% compartmentalization is important, and being and detaching from short-term outcomes, zooming out and understanding that you're going to have seasons in your career. But from a relationship perspective, if you're not texting folks, if you're not talking about your family and your interests, that's what you're looking for, even in your professional connections, not the type of relationship where you send the email like, hey, how are you doing? I was hoping to get 10 minutes on your calendar. If you're doing that type of thing, it's not a strong enough relationship, right? Like, these should be folks that you can text on a Friday night to hang out if you're in town, right? So I think that I hope that helps, but I see it as two different ways.
To your last point, I kind of feel guilty about the fact that people. So I used to live in Atlanta 15 years ago, and people who have local friends and people I know have been asking me, like, when do you want to meet up? I'm like, well, let me check my calendar, and it feels kind of sad to have to do that, but that's kind of the world we live in. And most, one of the reasons I keep coming back to meetings like Nanox, because I have so many friends that come here, and I've lived in 5 different cities over the course of my career, and it's kind of like a class reunion in a lot of ways. So absolutely, I'm don't be afraid to allow your colleagues to become good friends, and I have many of them here, and I hope that never changes.
Yeah. I just want to say, without a doubt, we get a lot of our sense of self-worth is very much tied to what we do, right? Whether we like it or not, that's very much what happens. I always say it for myself, because I get if I'm interested in something, I get very obsessed and laser focused, and I lose myself, and I lose my relationships with my close people, family, and so on, in the sense that I'm so focused that I'm not helping myself, right? So I always try to consciously have boundaries, always try to make sure I have time for myself to heal, to recover, and always try to be the person that you want to work with, not the person that you want to avoid, if you understand what I mean, right? So as much as work is important, it is also important to like I say, to honor yourself, to honor your needs, and to be the colleague that you would like to have. I hope that answers the question.
If you're laid off, you get the news. I mean, just a couple things to kind of tell yourself, and I think there was a Saturday Night Live sketch that I may come off sounding like you're smarter than you are. There's more people out there that want to help you that you think there are. And don't be afraid to leverage that. Don't be shy. Don't feel like, oh, people aren't going to help me. Speaking personally, one of the things I came out of the experience was, like I said, a cure for imposter syndrome. I was really surprised at the number of people that were interested in hiring me, and I was not. intellectually that made sense, but personally I wasn't expecting that, and it was really nice to see.
Did we answer your question, or did you have another follow-up?
So no, I didn't have a follow-up. I was just going to make a bit of a statement to reinforce what you had mentioned earlier about some of the processes about hiring. I'm a hiring manager and executive at a large nonprofit, and like structured questions and other things like that you had brought up, like we've implemented that through our process because of a lot of the same things that you mentioned. There's a lot of bias introduced through like unstructured question asking and things like that. We try hard to make sure we do things like state up front what the expectations of the interview are before we even start. Before I even let a candidate talk, I'll share with them like details about things like, hey, this is the position, this is our company, this is what I'm expecting out of this, and things like that. And then at the very end, I always make sure to walk away with here's the things that you will expect from us from the next steps from this. I think a couple people had mentioned here that it's like a 50-50. I'm being interviewed as the hiring manager as much as I'm interviewing somebody else, and that's so true. So all that stuff, I just want to reinforce that.
That's great that you're doing that, because I'd say that's like 10% of companies actually do that, and I think that most of the companies that people have interviewed probably have experienced a process that's not like that at all, right? So that's great that you guys are doing that.
All right, I think that's the end of our time. Thank you, Anna and Chris and James, so much for taking the time out of your day to join us and to share your experiences with everyone here. Yeah, absolutely. That's it.